Hey, welcome to Acast. My name's Lizzie, I lead the marketing team here, and I'm hosting a few sessions for podcast creators like you to get the most out of their show using Acast. In other videos, we'll look at monetizing your podcast and building your listener community. But in this session, we're going to focus on growing your audience. If you're someone who makes podcasts, then I'm going to assume that, like me, you listen to them too. To put a number on it, my phone tells me I'm currently subscribed to 30 different shows. So, clearly, we're all good at being audience members, but how did we find those shows in the first place? If you've just made the first episode of your podcast, good work. But that was just the beginning. Now it's time to share it with the world. Podcasts are made to be listened to, and connecting with an audience is going to be so important to the long-term success of your show. Not only that, but finding your people can have a transformative effect on the podcast itself. Right now, it's just you and a mic, but find an audience and you can add thousands of other voices into the mix, responding, interacting, and spreading the word about how great they think your show is. It's important to say that finding and growing an audience for your podcast won't happen overnight. It can take time and effort and involve a number of different strategies. But if that sounds like a big job, don't worry. Through a combination of your vision and Acast's easy-to-use tools, finding a listener base has never been easier. During this session, we'll look at branding, publishing, and promotion, equipping you with everything you need to launch your podcast with a bang and continue finding more and more listeners. First up, let's talk about branding. So your brand will be the first point of contact that people have with your show, whether on a podcast app, social media, your website, or anywhere else. Getting the name and the look right will be fundamental in finding the people who will want to listen to it. Or to look at it another way, it will be instrumental in helping them find you. This is an opportunity to get creative and express what got you excited about your idea in the very first place. And of course, all of this starts with a name.
Welcome to Two Black Girls, One Rose.
You're listening to Shag Monoid, another episode of Don't Blame Me.
You might already have a name for your show, or it could be something you're still figuring out. Either way, it's worth taking some time to consider a few things before you settle on something. After all, you want to get this right. The name is the first thing many people will hear about your podcast. It's what they'll search for when they want to listen to it, and it's what they'll tell their friends about when they recommend it. So try to keep it simple. Your show description will be where you do the real explaining, so shoot for something catchy that will stick in people's heads. Depending on the tone of your podcast, a light-hearted turn of phrase might work, but if your show's a bit more serious, it could be as straightforward as a summary of what you'll be covering. Once you've got a few ideas, try them out on friends, see what sticks. Or also, avoid including the word podcast in your name because it's a bit of a cliche, it takes up space, and everyone knows it's a podcast. So once you think you've landed on the perfect name, all that you need to do is Google it. There might be something the same out there already, which is not the end of the world if there is, if it's small, or if it's no longer releasing. But if it seems pretty well established, it's probably best to have another think. Right, name down. The next step is thinking about artwork. So much like naming your podcast, you want your artwork to communicate exactly what your show is about in a simple but really eye-catching way. So have a look at a few examples of podcast cover arts that work really well. So what do they all have in common? Yeah, they're visually striking, but in a simple way. They all use bright colours, and in most cases they just have a single image of the host or the subject matter to tell a really straightforward story about the show. The text, it's clear and easy to read. Don't forget, most people are going to be viewing your artwork as a small thumbnail on their phone, and if the text is too small, they won't be able to read it. Finally, while all these artworks have a few things in common, the main thing they share is their uniqueness. Yours is going to be appearing alongside thousands of others in podcast apps, so do your best to stand out. And then the final component of your branding is the description, which you'll provide when you publish your podcast on Acast. And this is where you'll get a chance to introduce yourself in a bit more detail. So your description should be a short bit of text that sets up the premise and the tone of your show, and you as the host as well. Try to introduce the concept for new listeners in a way that's both approachable but also intriguing, and also shows that you know your stuff. You want to avoid being a bit too sort of insidery. So you might have an area of expertise, but you want your show to feel inviting for people who are new to the subject as well. If you only had 10 seconds to convince a new listener to come on board, how would you sell it to them? So you might have heard people talking about an elevator pitch. Well, that's basically what this is. It's a summary of what the show is about and why it matters in as few words as possible. So shoot your best shot. Try it now. 10 seconds, sell me your show.
Acast, it's William and Jordan here from Help I Sexted My Boss.
And this was a name that I came up with for a book pitch about 7 or 8 years ago.
And we've not heard the end of it. Did you come up with the name, really?
I
You've
did.
not mentioned it.
And ironically, we are now doing a book. But in the meantime, it's been identifying as a podcast. And it's a very good name. Why is it so good, though?
I think because it ultimately...
It's a bit it's cheeky.
It's cheeky and it gets your attention straight away. So you read it and you see that name and you're like, oh, what's this all about? And yeah, it's a bit, it stands out, doesn't it? It pricks the ears, if you will. It's, sometimes we've had to cut out the word sexted for marketing reasons and stuff like that. But other than that, it's fine.
Yeah, but I think a little asterisk title actually leads to a little bit more intrigue.
Yeah.
And you do what you want to go above, beyond, don't do the ordinary, don't do vanilla. There's so much vanilla out there. Be a little bit provocative.
Come up with a good title. Think of Channel 5 when you do it, because Channel 5 got some great titles. They have.
Now you've got the branding sorted, you need a snappy trailer to introduce yourself and the show. And this is a great way to make sure potential listeners have every chance of getting to know you. Then you're ready to publish the first episode of your podcast. This is what all your hard work so far has been leading up to, taking that first step into the unknown and launching it into the world. If this is your first time, publishing simply means hosting your podcast through a distributor like Acast, so audiences can find it and listen to it through their apps. What we're going to run through now is how you go about submitting your show for distribution and what happens next. At Acast, we believe podcasts should be available across any listening app to maximise your chances of finding as many listeners as possible. So, rather than restricting your listener base to just one platform, we publish it to as many as possible, meaning, unlike watching TV, you don't have to keep switching between apps or channels to listen to your favourite shows. By publishing your podcast with Acast, you can share it to all of the most popular platforms at just the click of a button. The process couldn't be easier. Just hit the distribution tab in Acast and you'll find everything you need. Now that you've published your show, you're in a great position to take advantage of Acast's insight tools, all of which have been developed to help you better understand your listeners. You can find them on the Insights dashboard. Select the show you want to dig into from the drop-down menu, and from here, you'll be able to view 6 groups of data. So, 1. Overview, which will help you spot big picture patterns in your listening data. Performance, on the other hand, will show you listening numbers episode by episode, so you can contrast and compare over time. Listener will give you the number of unique listeners you've reached over the past week. Podcast players will tell you which platforms people are listening on. Location, fairly self-explanatory, provide you with a map of where your listeners are based. Over time, these will give you a behind-the-scenes view of your show, allowing you to track what's clicking with your audience. So, now you're up and running and it's time to get the word out there. This means promoting your podcast. Even if you consider yourself the shy and retiring type, you're going to want to take this stage seriously. You're entering a busy market, and so it's important to think about how you're going to stand out. Your first port of call should be social media, the most affordable and impactful way of reaching new listeners. Use the same artwork across the podcast and your social accounts to really help build that brand recognition and make it super easy for people to find you. Also, add links to your podcast social media accounts in your podcast description so listeners can follow you from there too. Once you've started publishing regular episodes, use social media to get the world hooked on your show. It's up to you how you do this, and you'll find your voice over time. You might have success posting snippets of audio from your latest episode or a preview of who your next guest will be, but remember, whatever you do, consistency is key. Post about every episode, letting people know why this latest installment is a must listen. This is also an opportunity to build on your relationship with your listeners, run polls, ask for feedback, read out funny or thoughtful posts during your next show. Your followers will be even more likely to tune in each episode if they feel part of the show. Finally, if you want to step things up a level, you could advertise your own podcast across Acast Podcast Network using our self-serve advertising tool. Where better to find new podcast listeners than advertising on podcasts? Our ad platform lets you share an ad promoting your show with a targeted audience, and with more than 92,000 shows on Acast, there's a lot of listeners to pick from. This is a paid-for service, so one to consider once you're ready to invest a little bit more. But with ad campaigns from as little as $250, you equally don't have to break the bank to reach a much bigger audience of podcast fanatics.
Hey, my name is Lloyd. I'm a podcaster and content creator, and I've been posting on TikTok for over a year now, and it's been life-changing. I mean, not only has it helped me get more podcast listeners, it's also helped me become a little more concise with my content and to get a better understanding what exactly my podcast listeners want to hear from me. Creating content on TikTok is so informal, and the barrier to entry is so low that you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to get it right, you can make mistakes, and that's still very much accepted on that platform. And so I knew that posting videos on TikTok would help me grow my podcast, but also it was just an easy place to start. I've now grown to love TikTok, and it's my primary platform. And so if you're a content creator, I'd highly recommend that you start posting on TikTok or Instagram, whatever short form platform you choose. I know the difference it's made for me, and it's literally changed my life and my podcast. And so I would really encourage you to do the same. Peace.
So this session should hopefully have given you the knowledge and tools you need to take your podcast out into the world. Now you've put all that work into making your show, you deserve to find an audience. If you're just starting out, this might seem like a daunting task, and you certainly shouldn't expect overnight success, but hopefully what I've shared today has shown you is that there are plenty of straightforward ways to get started from day one. Provided you take care of the 3 stages, branding, publishing, and promotion, and give your podcast the time to grow, you'll be golden. Find out more about promoting and growing your podcast at acast-essentials.com.